Even in our contemporary society, when we talk about meditation, everybody wants to know exactly what do I do and exactly how do I do it, as if you needed some very detailed sort of manual of how to do it. It shows us that we really aren't very comfortable with this kind of emptiness, with just sort of being, you might say, existing. Kind of a type of contemplation where we're very much paying attention, but it's done with great ease and relaxation. As I said, it starts to touch upon something deeper within us. You can't really make that too much into a technique, can you? Otherwise, it becomes a little too much doing, too complicated. It starts to move out of the heart and into the head too much. But simply to kind of easefully listen, even to listen to the breeze outside, or the sound of the waves, or children playing, or just easily listening to your own breath, It's a kind of contemplation. It brings you into a kind of inner solitude. And there's a great kind of ease with it. And also when we get more accustomed to it, we're not resisting it so much, we stop fidgeting with it, then we start to feel, kinesthetically, you feel in the body, in the mind, in the heart, in the soul, you sort of feel enriched by it, you feel renewed by it. Just through something as simple as that, you can feel it. And so this level of emptiness, you might say, this kind of contemplative loafing, is really the foundation of almost every kind of contemplative practice that there ever was. This is kind of at the heart of it all, being able to be still. This is the heart of prayer as well. Prayer begins with the capacity to listen. If our prayer is just what we're demanding from God, then we're not really praying. We're in an exchange or something, we're trying to make a deal. So when one prays, one has to start with a kind of listening, a kind of openness. And as many of the mystics know that went along that kind of path, the Christian path, and other paths where prayer is a very rich part of the path, that many of the contemplatives came to see that, that at many times when they sat down to pray, that when they came into a state of listening, their state of listening itself might have become the prayer itself, so they didn't find it even necessary to speak words at that point. That the listening itself was the prayer. As they said in the Christian mystics called it the prayer of quiet. There's something also about, I think, our sort of mentality of the West as well, where it's not something that we don't learn to trust the universe. Or you could say, religiously speaking, we don't necessarily learn to trust God. We don't learn to trust life. That's not something that's emphasized much, is it? We're taught how to get one over on life. Do you know how to succeed, how to conquer, how to break it up into its bits and reassemble it, and all the sort of technical things that we can do with life, that we can accomplish through using life. But it's not part of our heritage, at least not our recent heritage, where we're really taught to have a kind of trust, that there is a kind of wisdom, a kind of sacredness that is inherent within the structure of life itself. And therefore we could actually listen to it, rather than always be trying to do something with it. I think this is an underappreciated weakness of our given culture, the profound distrust that our culture has, that many of us grow up with, just about life. The mistrust, in other words, that if I become for a moment contemplative, if I become, as Walt Whitman would say, if I just loaf for a while, that if I was just to do that, if I was just to come into a state of deep listening, it's not part of our cultural heritage. It says, yes, and then something very profound might happen, that you might connect with something very wise or very loving or very sacred. Of course, there are those voices in our culture from the past that have been that. Of course, the monastic part of Western culture has suggested that to us, but in our modern culture, that's not something. I think we more grow up with a sort of anxiety about life. And so these even the beginnings of a type of emptiness, this sort of receptivity and listening is something that's runs a little counter to many people's, certainly their conditioning. Maybe even almost it's counterintuitive to them, at least initially. In a way, in a certain sense, to listen deeply is itself an act of faith. To listen in quietness is an act of faith, The faith is that there's something valuable in that quietness. There's something valuable in the listening. There's something valuable there that I can't grasp, that I cannot control, that I cannot manipulate, but there's something there that's valuable, that's profound. So for most people, say if they start to meditate, what they learn initially can take them years to learn it. Some never learn it. But it is simply what we're invited to learn from the very beginning is not to struggle, to sit down for 15 minutes and not to struggle against sitting there for 15 minutes. Do you know what I mean? We sit here in silence for 15 minutes. It's a very short period of time. It's nothing in a given day, It's a very small commitment of time, But to be able to do so in such a way that we're not struggling against those 15 minutes, pushing against them, that our mind doesn't get lost in its own anxiety. It takes a kind of trust. And it seems to me that's really what originally what a word like faith is. It's the capacity to trust in a type of silence and inner solitude. That's faith. Not faith in a doctrine, not faith in what someone says, including myself. But of faith in one's own inner solitude. that kind of trust in one's own inner solitude. To me, that's what faith is, ultimately. Because that's where everything ultimately arises out of that. All sacredness arises out of that kind of solitude, that kind of capacity. And so that's one given level of emptiness, is just to listen, to enter into your own solitude. Even if you're in the midst of a busy city, you can to enter into the midst of your own solitude. And of course, then there's when we enter into our own solitude, often what we find initially anyway is, a lot of quite random thinking, quite either random or just almost embarrassingly conditioned thinking. If you watch a child or a small baby or a young child or something, and they hear a plane noise, or they hear a tractor outside, or they hear a car honk, or they hear something like that, you notice they don't immediately go into reactivity and anger about it. They don't. When a car honks, they just don't go, "Damn it!" Do you know what I mean? It's just a car honking. It may startle them, it may not, you know what I mean? Or if they're quietly, in a room and the neighbor's dog is barking, their child isn't usually getting really, really upset about it, and it's just the dog barking. Give them a few years to be conditioned, and they'll learn that when a car honks at you that you're supposed to get really mad, and when you're trying to be quiet, that if the dog is barking next door, that you're supposed to be upset about it, and all that kind of stuff. It's all learned. Nobody born with that kind of thing. If anything, the sounds to like a child are quite interesting. They're kind of they're fascinating.